Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very thrilled to welcome Dylan Anderson to the podcast today to talk about the film Cold Turkey, starring Dick Van Dyke, the one and only feature film directed by Norman Lear. This film came out about 50 years ago in February of 1971. How are we doing, Dylan?
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to talk about this movie because I thought it was strange and delightful.
So I think strange and delightful is the perfect way to describe this thing. I mean, I don't know about you. I had never heard of this movie until about a week ago doing my research of what films came out in the early part of 71. And when I saw that there was a Dick Van Dyke movie directed by the great Norman Lear, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I wanted to take a look at it. Before we get to the movie,
Yeah.
Dylan, I just want to ask you, like, your history with film. Like, do you have any favorite films? What role has movies played in your life?
I've always loved movies. I've always kind of appreciated the art of making movies, trivia, and like how movies kind of coincided with the culture at the time, which I think is kind of like an interesting topic when we talk about this movie a little bit later on. But I've really gotten into just exploring kind of the old Hollywood era from like the 30s to the 60s.
Okay.
And in terms of my favorite movies, this one is a little basic, so I apologize, but I have to mention it. One of my favorite movies is The Wizard of Oz. I think it's so
Oh, that's one of my favorites too. Yeah.
kind of incredible that a movie that came out 80 years ago still holds up, not just from a storytelling perspective, but also technically. Like, it's still kind of technically impressive how that movie got made. And I think,
Yeah.
if you make something with that kind of impact and that kind of visual kind of uniqueness, I think says so much about film and how it can endure like decades later.
I feel like it's more than a film. It's hard to
Yeah,
think of Wizard of Oz as a movie. It's like its own separate entity. It's
Totally.
it's so iconic.
Totally. It's taken on a total life of its own, and I think I really admire that. Another one of my favorite movies, and I think this is where my love of kind of the 30s through 60s era is All About Eve. I think
Yes.
that movie is the writing in that movie, it's so like funny and so bitchy at the same time
Yeah.
that it just always leaves me like cackling. And
Yeah.
I feel like every actor in that movie is like performing at a 10. You
Yeah.
have
I think they
David,
recognize the power of that screenplay and how good it is, and they're like, we're gonna bring it.
totally. You got
Yeah.
Betty Davis, George Sanders, Celeste Holm, and Baxter. And I
Marilyn
think,
Monroe.
yes, in
is
one
in
of her
that.
like
Yeah.
earliest movies.
Yeah.
And she's so funny in that movie too. And I think
Yeah.
it's a good kind of gateway to exploring other kind of black and white movies because you can look into Betty Davis's filmography. You can look
Yes.
into Joseph L. Mankiewicz. And I think that it's kind of like a good door. And I think that that was kind of my gateway drug, I guess, for classic film.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then the
like
last,
I don't know if you saw, Dylan, but I'm actually doing a year of Betty Davis. Last year I did a year of Joan Crawford where I went through their filmography. And so I got to discover all these great Crawford movies. And then this year I'm doing Betty Davis. So I will get to All About Eve, which I have not seen in a long time. Excited to watch it again. And then I'm going to
I've been
end these two. I'm going to end these 2 years, Christmas
Okay.
week, with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I'm going to bring the two actors together for the final movie,
Oh
which
my
will be
God.
fun. But I love
That
Betty Davis. I've only seen like maybe 4 or 5 of her films, so I'm excited to kind of see more of her work.
Betty and Joan are kind of, I know that they always get compared, and that's kind of not fair because I think they have kind of two very different
They're
personas.
very different personas. Absolutely, that's a good point. Yeah.
But I feel like Betty leans into the crazy a little bit more than Joan does.
Yeah.
Joan, if you look at her in like Trog or even in Whatever Happened
Yeah.
to Baby Jane, she plays it like dead serious, and I think that that's what I love about it. Whereas I feel like Betty, she's just like, I'm gonna go full tilt bonkers.
Oh yeah. If Betty Davis had been in Trog, it would have been a much crazier performance. It would not have been as serious as Crawford plays it for sure.
Absolutely.
So what was your other favorite?
My last favorite, again, a little on the basic side, but I have to mention it. Princess Bride, one of my all-time favorites. It just has, and coincidentally, produced by Norman Lear.
Oh,
which
okay.
I
Yeah.
found that out while I was like writing down my notes. I was like, well, there's a connection there.
Oh, cool.
But I think that movie just has everything I want in a movie, which is comedy, romance, action. I think it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it takes itself very seriously at the
Mhm.
same time. And the rewatchability on that, I think I could watch that movie 1,000 times and it's never not going to make me laugh, make me cry, just keep me invested.
Did you see it when you were really young? I feel like I missed the boat on Princess Bride because I didn't see it till like late in high school. So I liked it, but I feel like if I discovered it at like age 7 or 8, maybe I'd like it more today.
I was the
You
same
know?
way. I think I first saw it when I was like 16, which is a
Okay.
little old, I guess.
Uh-huh.
But I had a friend who was really into it and was like, oh my God, you haven't seen this movie? I grew up on this movie.
Yeah.
And then I watched it and I was like, okay, I get it now. And I want to rewatch it like immediately.
Like I know so many people, it's in their top 5 favorite movies. And for me, that director, Rob Reiner, I feel like he's made better films. I think Stand By Me is a better movie. And I love When Harry Met Sally, which is my favorite romantic comedy. Those two movies he made like on the opposite ends of Princess Bride. So, man, he had a run in the 80s, Dylan. Rob Reiner, man. It was, he also did This Is Spinal Tap. And he started the decade with Misery, one of my favorite horror films with Kathy Bates. So he had a run of like 6, 7 movies. It was insane.
I love that kind of director who's just very all over the place.
And they're all
It's
different
kind
genres.
of, yeah, it's
How
crazy.
do you do it?
I love that and I respect that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned All About Eve, which is such a great film. My only annoyance with that movie is that it came out the same year as my favorite film, which is also about Hollywood, and that's Sunset Boulevard. So the one that took all the Oscars for 1950 was All About Eve, and Sunset Boulevard didn't go away with very much.
I know.
I feel like we can love both. You know.
Yeah, and then that year's Oscar race, you have not just Gloria Swanson in
Best
Sunset
Actress was
Boulevard.
crazy that year. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have Betty Davis and Ann Baxter, who are both for All About Eve. And then who ends up taking the Oscar? Judy Holliday for Born Yesterday.
For Born Yesterday.
Which I rewatched that movie recently, and I was
it's
like,
fine. Like how, like Gloria Swanson. Come on, that is just an amazing performance. So great that she couldn't really work after that because she had nailed that part so well. Nobody would hire her for like an acting role in a movie. So,
totally.
Because she couldn't really play anything else but that character. But
yeah.
Those are great. Yeah, those are great picks. And The Wizard of Oz, which I haven't seen in a long time. I feel like, for people who are reluctant to look at a classic film, I feel like Wizard of Oz is the best way into films of the 30s and 40s, because I don't know how you watch that movie and don't just get completely engrossed in it from minute one.
Well, yeah, I actually saw they had a re-release of it, I think.
Yeah, it's played in theaters here and there, yeah.
Pretty recently, and I was there in the theater back when we could go to theaters. I miss it
2019.
So much. And it was so interesting that it was a very mixed audience. It was like really old people, really young children, people around my age, people who were in their like 40s and 50s. And I think that if a movie can kind of connect to people of all different age ranges,
it's hard to do.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the last movie you saw in the theater, Dylan? You remember?
So the last movie I saw in theaters was a re-release of Goodfellas, because I had actually never seen it.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I have to watch it. But I think the last new release I saw was, did you see the new Emma?
No, it's on I have it recorded on my DVR. I'm going to watch it soon. Yeah, it's supposed to be pretty good, right?
I really liked it.
That was like late February of 2020.
Yeah.
Like right at the end.
Mm-hmm. But when I went there was a woman in the audience who just would not stop. She had to be drunk or something, because she was like laughing her ass off at every single thing anyone said. And I was like, this movie's great. It is not that funny.
Yeah, I love the main actress in that. She was on The Queen's Gambit. She was also in The New Mutants, which I haven't seen yet, which that movie was shot like 5 years ago and it just came out. So I will look at that too. But
speaking of Cold Turkey, which I found out I think it was completed in 69 and then wasn't released until 71.
Yeah, that's not that insane. I see stories like that on IMDb sometimes in the trivia, like filming, was completed in 69 and then it didn't come out until February of 71. I'm like, well, it's a story if it's like 4 or 5 years, like if it's like a
Totally.
long stretch. But I always tell people, the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, that shot at the beginning of 2011, and then the movie came out in October of 2013. So
Totally.
it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean like it's a a bad quality film all the time. Sometimes it's just like, oh, they have a release date for 1970, and for whatever reason they push it back to early 71. If it had been 3 years since the filming, that would be maybe questionable. But it did say in the notes, right, that they didn't really know how to like what people would make of it, and like, so maybe they were working on the marketing.
I thought that was so strange that they were like, we didn't really know what the box office appeal was. And I watched it and I was like, I don't think anything's that racy, but I don't know, maybe that early 70s audience was just not prepared for this.
Well, it's an unusual comedy. It's not a laugh out loud every minute kind of a comedy that you might have seen in in other kinds of movies around this time. I mean, this is kind of like more of like a kind of a crazy, unusual, satirical comedy, and it's not necessarily one where you're just like laughing out loud all the time.
Right. Well, something that I wrote about and something that I took notes of while I watched the movie was that the tone of the movie, for some reason, kept reminding me of like a Simpsons episode. Like I could totally see this whole plot just being like a Simpsons episode, and
that's totally true. Yeah, the 25 million.
Totally. And I think that that's why I kind of enjoyed the movie. Spoiler alert, I actually kind of like this movie, is that it was funny enough to keep me engaged.
Yeah. And this movie, the cast in this movie is great. You have Gene Stapleton, who was one of those actors like Madeline Kahn, like who just, when they pop up in something, I'm very happy.
I think that Madeline Kahn would have fit very well into this movie. And I think she would have taken the crazy to another level.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You also have Vincent Gardenia, who I love from one of my favorite films, Little Shop of Horrors, the 86 version with Rick Moranis. He's, like the boss in that. Whenever I see him, and I just watched him. There's another film, another comedy that came out in February of 1971 called Little Murders, which an episode will have just dropped for that. Vincent Gardenia is also in that. So he was working a lot in film at this time in like 70, 71.
Yeah. And I think the cast note says that a lot of people in this movie would go on to work with Norman Lear again, which I think
like Gene Stapleton, of course.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that Norman Lear, he makes this film. I mean, at the beginning, it's like story by, written by, produced and directed by Norman Lear. He is like all in on this thing. And then he never directs another feature film the rest of his, huge, celebrated, long career. It's kind of interesting that he wouldn't have attempted another film.
So I wanted to ask you, is there any other instances you can think of where somebody, preferably like a showrunner, is very known for their TV work, but directed one movie and that was it?
That's a good question. I would have to think on that. Like somebody who's mostly known, like a Shonda Rhimes, or someone who's mostly known as a TV showrunner, and then, Aaron Sorkin was, he was not necessarily showrunner. I mean, he was big on like The West Wing, right? But he wrote screenplays and, obviously won an Oscar for The Social Network. And then he just got into directing. He directed a really good film that just came out on Netflix called The Trial of Chicago 7. And then I think that was his second film, right? The first one was Molly's Game with Jessica Chastain. So he's a kind of known as a writer, and he worked on, a lot of television, including The Newsroom on HBO, who has now gotten into the directing game. But yeah, like a showrunner who mostly worked in television, who has like one feature film on their credit. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But yeah, Norman Lear, I knew of this man as like the showrunner of so many famous 70s comedies. I did not know he had made a film. So when I saw that he was the director of this, I was like, oh, I have to do an episode because he's great.
Well, I had looked it up because I wanted to know where in the timeline, this movie came out in regards to his TV work.
Uh-huh.
And I think All in the Family had came out like a month before this.
Okay.
So I wonder if he was like, well, this TV show is doing a lot better than this movie. So I wonder if he was just like, I'm over it. I'm done with movies. TV's the place.
We can speculate all we want. I mean, honestly, the fact that he never made another film, I'm looking at his IMDb page right now just to see kind of what the timeline was. But honestly, I feel like he must not have had a great experience on this film. That's kind of my take on it. So he did write other screenplays. He wrote the screenplay to Divorce American Style, which came out in 1967, and that also starred Dick Van Dyke. So this is not his only like screenplay. He also wrote that. He wrote a script in 68 called The Night They Raided Minsky's. And then let's see, that's a really good question. When did All in the Family start? So it says 1971. So that would have been probably in the fall, right? So 1971 to 1979. This film was made in 69, came out in early 71, and then All in the Family premieres sometime in 71. So yeah, I'm sure by the time he was all done with Cold Turkey, he was kind of looking forward to his television projects and all of the great shows that were to come.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I would have loved it if he would have directed something else, because I thought the direction was pretty okay.
Yeah.
I do think it was a little TV-ish, I guess.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a feature film as well as some other movies I've looked at for the podcast. But yeah, I mean, he had, by the end of the 70s, he would have so much power. I think if he had wanted to write and direct another movie, I think he would have been able to. There's so much crazy, there's so much crazy stuff at like early 80s, mid 80s. Like I'm sure he could have come up with something around that era. That was really big time for comedy too. Like early 80s, so many great classic comedies around that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we'll never know. But he is still with us, right? How old is Norman Lear? Isn't he like almost 100?
Gosh, I want to find out.
Let me see. Yeah, so he was born July 27th, 1922. So he is coming up on his 99th birthday in July. He is still with us, which is amazing. He and Dick Van Dyke.
We need to
are both here.
Dick Van Dyke, and we need to protect Norman Lear. We just got to keep them locked up.
How much would you freak out right now, Dylan, if I said, okay, Dick Van Dyke and Norman Lear are coming in, and they both popped onto the podcast right now? Would you freak out a little bit?
I would probably freak out, and I would ask like a lot of questions about Julie Andrews. I'm not going to lie.
Would you faint if Dick Van Dyke just came on right now and said, "Hi, Dylan, how are you?"
I would faint. I think I would.
And I'd say, "Thank you, Dick Van Dyke. You had my guest faint, and you can go now. Thank you."
I would ask him to sing "Chim Chimney."
Yeah.
And
which I'm sure he'd be happy to do that, right? Just any song you want him to sing.
Yeah, that seems like the kind of guy Dick Van Dyke is.
But yeah, I mean, one kind of difficult thing about looking at films from 50 years ago, there's so many films I look at where the director or one of the actors are not with us anymore, right? It's 50 years ago. But here's a case of two men who were past 40 who made this movie in 69 who are still alive right now, knock on wood. So that's really fantastic, and Dick Van Dyke was just in Mary Poppins Returns a little over 2 years ago, so he's still working.
This past week has been, I don't want to say traumatic, but it's been a week of big celebrity deaths. Cloris Leachman, you're probably planning on talking about Last Picture Show sometime very soon.
Last Picture Show came out in October of 71, so we will get to that later this year. Yeah, we're recording this on January 31st. We just lost Cloris Leachman and Cicely Tyson in the course of 2 days of each other, 3 days,
right back to back.
Yeah, and they say that it happens in threes, so I'm just like, okay, give us a breather, please.
Right, and I just watched Sounder this past week because I had never seen it, and I knew who Cicely Tyson was, but I wasn't that familiar with her filmography. Yeah. But that movie I thought was so good, and Cicely Tyson's amazing in that movie. Rest in peace. Yeah. Such a great actress.
Yeah, Sounder came out in 72, so I will get to that next year. I have never seen that film, so I'm excited to check it out.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, so let's get into Cold Turkey. So I just have for those of you who don't know what this movie's about, and it's probably all of you because it's a pretty obscure movie. I didn't even know it existed until recently. Basically, it opens with the great Bob Newhart. And speaking of television, an actor who's really known for TV more so than film. So when I see him, I'm like, oh, that's right, it's a film. But so wanting positive publicity, a tobacco company offers $25 million to any town in America where all of its inhabitants will quit smoking for 30 days. That's kind of the Simpsons-like premise of this movie.
Exactly.
Kind of like a really goofy premise, because as soon as I was like, wait, how do they know? This is like 69, 70, 71. I mean, how are they going to track how do they know that people aren't in their basement smoking?
Apparently, the solution is just full-on authoritarianism.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of like a head scratcher for me. And then so we have our lead character of the film, played by Dick Van Dyke, is Reverend Clayton Brooks, who lives in Eagle Rock, Iowa. This film was actually shot there in Iowa. He and the townspeople of about 4,000, right? They accept the challenge to do this. So like they have to get everybody to sign, right? Like so at one point in the movie they're like, we have 98%. We just got to get the other 2%. And the idea, I mean, that's a pretty small town, 4,000 people, but that's a lot of signatures for everybody to get on board. And judging from this movie, people apparently like to smoke in like 69. Because there's a scene early on where they're just like lighting it up like there's no tomorrow. I'm like, wow.
Looking at this town, I kind of get it because there's nothing else to
do.
Smoke.
And go to church.
Right.
So they accept the challenge and they have 30 days, but it's not going to be easy, right? There's members of the tobacco company who are trying to sabotage the endeavor, especially on the final night, right? Which we'll talk about a little bit. I try not to give away the very, very end of the movie, just in case our listener wants to check it out. But we can talk a little bit about that last night, because there's one of my favorite sequences of the film is the final night, because there's a lot of great tension there. And it's kind of like all the characters are together. Not a COVID-friendly final scene. Which I don't know about you, Dylan. I don't care if the movie's 50 years old. When I watch a scene where there's like 100 people, all around each other, I'm like, ah.
I had that same thought with how much coughing and how much sneezing is in this movie. I had a problem with it.
The scene I laughed at the hardest was Gene Stapleton sneezing over and over and over behind Dick Van Dyke and Vincent Gardenia as they're trying to watch this TV news report. And at the same time, I'm like, oh, God, could you imagine someone doing that right now?
The fact that she wasn't even covering her mouth, she just was committed to sneezing all over everybody. I was like, oh, my God, this movie is making me nervous. And you know what? It's funny that you bring up COVID because it's hard not to think about it when we watch movies now. But this whole premise of this movie is about getting a whole community to commit to something for the good of each other.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, now we know that that's a really big ask.
Yeah, can you imagine a town of 4,000 where it's like, okay, for 30 days, we can't like interact with each other. We have to stay apart for 30 days. And then we'll all be COVID-free until the next person rolls into town.
Yep. And here we are on month 10 of lockdown.
Yeah. March, what did I read recently? Like January 2020, 31 days. February 2020. Well, was it 29 days? No, it was 20. Was it 28 or 29 days last year? I think 20. Was it 29? Was it
29? I feel like it was a leap year last year.
A leap year last year?
That feels like 10 years.
And then it's like March 2020, 300 days and counting. It's all been March 2020. Well, hopefully soon we get out of this. I mean, I don't know. Like, I thought we'd be back to normal by now. And so I'm like, wow, I don't know I don't think we'll ever be really back to normal, but slowly but surely.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. Go. We're really, really bumming out our listeners. So let's talk about the funny.
I know.
So before we get into our main thoughts of this movie, I have some trivia notes. So we mentioned that this was Norman Lear's only feature film as a director. This was also Randy Newman's first music score, the great Randy Newman. Did you recognize his voice at the beginning? I'm like, that's Randy Newman. Like, I hadn't looked it up or anything.
That's so crazy that this movie has a lot of like really interesting firsts and connections. And I was not expecting a Randy Newman song at the beginning. I thought that song was so weird, though. What did you think of it?
You know what? I had a very strange reaction to it. I thought it was a very weird opening song for a comedy. But then was it the same song at the end over the end credits? Because I liked that song. Was it the same song?
I think it was the same song, but I thought it was like a downer.
It's a downer. The camera follows this stray dog just wandering down a road, and it's kind of a melancholic song of just kind of. I mean, it's not a song that gets you in the mood for a comedy. So I'm like, That's an interesting choice, Norman Lear.
It's a Randy Newman song that we're
Yeah.
not really used to. It's not the
Yeah.
fun kind of
Yeah.
bounce
It's
thing
not You've Got a Friend in Me.
right, exactly.
Which I feel like might have been more appropriate. I don't know. But I feel like at the end, it's almost like a depressing finale, like the last 5 minutes of the movie, that the song kind of fit better with the end credits.
I agree.
You know, I was like, oh, that's kind of lovely. Whereas at the beginning, I'm like, what is this?
It sets the tone so weird just off the jump.
Yeah. So Dick Van Dyke, I don't know if you saw this on his filmography. So he has a bunch of movies in the 60s, right? There's like at least 7 or 8 of them, starting with Bye Birdie in 63 and then Mary Poppins the year after. He's in a bunch of movies in the late 60s. And he shot this in 69, comes out in early 71. And then he's in like almost nothing film-wise for the entire 70s and 80s. Like he has, I think, a couple credits. I think maybe a couple, but yeah, I mean, when you get to the 70s and 80s, it's all television.
I wonder if he was just over the movies like Norman Lear was.
So it's like, okay, so both Norman Lear and Dick Van Dyke collaborate on this movie, and then they both basically turn to television for the 70s and 80s, and they're not even really working in film at all. So what's that about?
I don't know. I want to know. I want to know if there's drama involved. I want to know if, the making of this movie had anything to do with it.
There has to be a story. Right?
I want to know the story. Let's ask Dick Van Dyke when he comes on.
When he comes on. So Dick Van Dyke, 71 to 74, he has the new Dick Van Dyke Show. So that ran for 3 years. So he was doing that. He appeared on the Carol Burnett Show. And let's see, his next feature film theatrical credit after 1971's Cold Turkey is the 1979, a film called The Runner Stumbles. And then after that, his next feature film credit, like a movie that went to theaters, is not until 1990, Dick Tracy by Warren Beatty.
So funny.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. And then after that, it just does not get any better. After that is like Curious George, I think. I think he was in the
I mean, he was well known in the 90s for the show Diagnosis Murder, which was kind of like a takeoff of Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury, kind of taking this classic film star and, doing like a mystery TV show. So he was on that for many, many years. He was in Night at the Museum, right? The first one in 06. I think he's in the third one too, briefly. And then he appeared briefly in, Mary Poppins Returns. But basically after 71, basically his career is television, right?
That's so funny to think about. It's so funny how that kind of coincides with Norman Lear as well.
Yeah.
He's like, well, I guess I'm in this TV now.
Yeah, I mean, you'd almost think, gosh, this film must be really bad. It must be really rough. And it's not. It's not a great movie, but there's a lot going for it. And as you say, it's kind of weird and eccentric and, and different. And I always like that about especially a comedy. If a comedy is trying to do something a little bit offbeat, I'll go with it.
Totally.
So that was kind of a crazy coincidence to me that both Dick Van Dyke and Norman Lear kind of go into television for the most part after this. So we mentioned that it was shot in 69, not released until 71, which I believe Dick Van Dyke had like 2 other credits in 69. So probably was a good thing to move this back a little bit. You don't want to have too many movies come out in the same year. Just ask Jessica Chastain in 2011, right? I'm going to have 8 films in 1 year. One of them will get me an Oscar nomination. I mean, the actor has no control over that. You just work for 3 years and then all of a sudden everything comes out at once. Oh, okay.
Which I think is funny because especially if you go back and look at older films, it was not unusual for someone to have like 3 to 5 films come out in a year. If you just had 1 film come out in a year, you were considered not working. And I think that that's kind of funny how that has shifted recently, where it's like, you see an actor every 3 or 4
look
years.
at actors in the 30s and the 40s, like when they're under contract, like Bette Davis. I've been kind of looking at clips from some of her early movies because there's just too much. I can't watch them all. I'm basically picking one film for each of her first few years because like 31, 32, 33, it's like 7 to 9 credits. It's like, whoa, like that's like a movie a month almost.
Churning them out, just churning them out.
Just like you had no control really over your career at that time. In like the early 30s, they would just tell you, you're in this movie. Okay. Oh, you finished that? Okay. Now you're in this. And you just had to take it. Like you were under contract. You did not have creative control over your career to some extent. I mean, I think you could occasionally go after a role that you really wanted. like Betty Davis would do. Like in 1934, she does this film of Human Bondage, which is like this really like gripping drama that I think she kind of went after. It wasn't necessarily a role that they pushed her into.
Totally.
But it was tricky back then.
And you'll kind of see this when you look more at Betty's filmography. But before of Human Bondage, like you get the sense that they really didn't know what to do with her, because she's not.
Yeah.
Betty Davis is a beautiful actress, but
Uh-huh.
she's not what you think of when you think of a Hollywood beauty.
Yeah.
So they would stick her in all of these different kind of roles. And it wasn't until of Human Bondage, when she took a role that literally no other actress wanted to take,
Yeah.
that they started to kind of realize, oh, we'll make Betty kind of the crazy, evil kind of woman that nobody else wants to play.
Yeah, she is strikingly gorgeous in these early films. Like, I don't really think of Betty Davis as a beauty, but because I'm mostly familiar with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and All About Eve, where she's a little older. But yeah, there's just something a little bit about, like, unusual about her, that when she's playing these just goody goods in the early films, it doesn't feel right.
No, it feels, you're like almost jarred by it. You're like, okay, something's gonna happen.
Yeah. So a couple other things about Cold Turkey, Dylan. There was a musical version of this, workshopped in Washington in 2005. Someone like created a musical version of this for the stage. Had you heard of that before?
You know what? It's kind of funny that you mentioned it, because as I was watching this movie, I kind of felt like I would have preferred it as a musical.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I said that about another film on the podcast recently. I have to think of which one it was. Well, no, it was when I did an episode on Scrooge, which is this Christmas Carol adaptation from 1970 with Albert Finney, which is a musical. I had only seen, outside of maybe Muppet Christmas Carol, only versions of the Christmas Carol story told, just as a regular movie without music, without people singing and stuff. And watching Scrooge, I was like, how is every version of a Christmas Carol not a musical? It clearly needs to be a musical. I had that feeling too when I read that. I was like, oh yeah, Cold Turkey. I feel like
it makes sense.
There were moments of like where the pacing was a little bit slow and at parts, and I thought could have been a musical, Norman.
Yeah, and especially if you have Dick Van Dyke, great musical performer.
Yeah, most of his films of the 60s are musicals, right? Most of them, because he's such a great song and dance man. I mean, Mary Poppins is his most iconic film role. I mean,
and such a great physical comedian as well.
Yeah.
That I feel like wasn't totally utilized in this film, but I feel like. But, I feel like movies weren't really, or specifically movie musicals, were not exactly that cool in the early 70s. I feel like everyone was kind of living in that post Hello Dolly world.
Yes.
Where they didn't really want to see a musical unless they like, a cabaret or something like that.
Yeah, we've talked about that on the podcast, like early 70s. I mean, you get like Fiddler on the Roof. That comes out later in 71, which we'll get to. That was, I think, pretty popular. I mean, at least like with awards and things. But yeah, people are not flocking to musicals in the early 70s like they were in like the mid 60s and early 60s. That's for sure. There were just so many flops, right? Julie Andrews did like 2 or 3 in a row that were just not successful. 1970, she had one called Darling Lily, which I think was her biggest flop. And then she's like in very little, like in the 70s in films. Like she did a TV show. I read her memoir a few months ago, and she talked about how, after a couple flops, it was hard for her to kind of get back into film. I mean, she married Blake Edwards, and that helped because he like put her in most of her movies of the 70s and 80s was with Blake Edwards.
Enough, she comes back with a musical, Victor Victoria.
Yeah, that's directed by Blake Edwards. Yeah. So, but yeah, she took some years off of film. She did like a show, what was it called, the Julie Andrews Show or something. But yeah, musicals. I don't think Norman Lear and Dick Van Dyke. Maybe by 69, maybe they were like, yeah, let's not go in that direction. I don't know. But the premise is so goofy, it kind of lends itself to a musical.
Totally. I would want to know what a Norman Lear musical would sound like, though. I would be interested in
Did he ever do a TV series with songs like Glee or anything like that?
Oh my God. Norman Lear presents Glee. I would watch it.
Yeah, but I feel like there were like musical shows in the 70s and 80s. I mean, maybe not so popular, but I don't know if he was big into musicals. Probably not.
I mean, the Maude theme song goes off, but aside from that, I don't really know.
So Roger Ebert, the great film critic Roger Ebert, gave this movie 4 stars out of 4 stars. That was the other reason I wanted to watch it. I was like, I was like, Roger Ebert gave this little Dick Van Dyke comedy 4 stars, and he doesn't give 4 stars to everything. So I was
No.
like curious. I didn't actually get to read his review, but I looked at some snippets from it, and yeah, he just found it really, really, really funny. So sometimes with a comedy, Roger Ebert, if he laughed all the way through, he would just give it 4 stars, and his review would be very brief, and he'd say, "Yeah, this
Which
is funny."
I think is valid. I think if you have a comedy and it makes you laugh, then it did its job.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is kind of how I felt about this movie. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think I would give it a 4-star review like Roger did.
That was a pretty extreme.
I would give it probably about a 3.
Okay. Yeah, I would give it 2.5 out of 4. That would be my rating for this movie. It's like doing some unique things, like with the comedy and with the premise. I feel like one problem with this movie, and the last little bit of trivia before I get to that, is that the 25 million, Dylan, would equate to 161 million today. So that would be a lot. I feel like Sparks, Nevada, we could band together.
For a small town in Iowa, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, for 4,000 people, like, you know, everything going to, you know, what there's that one part where they have like the they have the list of things they're going to use the money for.
The funniest thing that they came up, and I don't know why this made me laugh, but the Americanism Center, I thought that just the term Americanism was just the funniest thing. And
Yeah.
there were that's what I mean about this movie, was that it was funny, but there were some things that just made me laugh so hard that I was like, this comedy is doing its job. I'm not
Okay,
mad.
good. Okay, good. Yeah, there were 2 weaknesses for me, and let's get into what we thought of the movie just overall. One is I didn't laugh very much in this movie. Like, I found it amusing, I smiled, but I wasn't laughing at very much. So I'll be curious to know what scenes you found really funny. And I just felt like, you mentioned it briefly before, I felt like Dick Van Dyke wasn't used well enough in this. Like, I felt like his character was a little bit unlikable compared to other films I've seen him in. He's not, you know, he doesn't need to play Bert from Mary Poppins in film after film. That's okay, but I just felt like his comic sensibilities weren't utilized as well as they could have been. I don't know. I felt like anyone could have played that role and it would have been about the same. I don't know.
I agree with you, actually, especially when you look at, and we'll talk about this more, I guess, when we talk more about Dick Van Dyke's movies. But
Yeah.
I think that when you think of Dick Van Dyke, you think of this very amiable, very kind of nice guy, almost like a Tom Hanks, I guess, would be a good comparison. And I felt like this role was not a good use of your Dick Van Dyke. And I agree with you. I feel like it could have been any other actor.
And it's not to say he can't play against type or do a role that's a little bit more villainous, or like, I love that. We just talked about an episode I recorded yesterday talking about actors who go against type. We were talking about Rodney Dangerfield, who's mostly known as a comedic actor in films like Caddyshack and Back to School, but he has that one really vicious dramatic role in Natural Born Killers by Oliver Stone, where he plays Juliette Lewis's father at the beginning, where he's really scary. And it's like, sometimes it takes you aback, like when you watch a comedic actor doing drama really well. I feel like Dick Van Dyke is, you know, even though we think of him as like this, as a Tom Hanks, you know, like a really likable, charismatic actor, like, you know, if he wanted to do something more against type, go for it. But I felt like this movie didn't push him in either direction well enough. Like, he's kind of in the middle.
I agree with that.
You know. So what else did we like about the film, or what were your kind of thoughts on this movie in general, Dylan?
Like I said, it kept me laughing enough to keep me engaged all the way through. I do feel like it's a little long.
Yeah, at 100 minutes.
Even though it's not a terribly long movie, it's like hour 45 minutes. I feel like it could have been probably 15 minutes shorter.
Yeah,
just
I mean,
a real, succinct kind of really funny comedy, and I feel like it would have succeeded. But I feel like a lot of jokes kind of went on too long, and a lot of scenes kind of went on too long.
Yeah, you know, I mean, 100 minutes isn't super long, but you could feel the length in this one more so than some other movies I've looked at for the podcast. One of the worst films I've looked at for the podcast by far is called Where's Papa from 1970. And that movie was 80 minutes long. And I said on the podcast, it should have been an hour.
It's a talent to make an 80-minute movie.
Like, hey, it can be done. We just talked about Charlie Chaplin's The Kid from 1921, celebrating movies from 100 years ago. And that film, that's considered a feature film, Dylan, it's 53 minutes long. And it was the perfect length. If it had been 90 minutes, it would have been too much. But at 53 minutes, it was fantastic.
That's why I compare this to a Simpsons episode.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you just made it a 30-minute Simpsons episode, switch out Mr. Tobacco with oh my God, what is his name? Why am I blanking on it?
On The Simpsons? I'm not a Simpsons trivia person.
You're not?
I've seen it, yeah. Mr. Burns, okay.
If you swap out Mr. Tobacco with Mr. Burns and swap out Dick Van Dyke with Redwood Lovejoy, I feel like this would be such a funny episode. But
are we 100% certain, Dylan, that there is not a Simpsons episode spoof of this movie? I mean, it's 30 seasons. How many hundreds and hundreds of episodes? I feel like there's got to be something.
There's got to be something like this.
Where someone comes into Springfield and says, we will give you a lot of money if all of you do this. I feel like that has to have happened, right?
I feel like it has to be, and I'm actually kind of shocked that it maybe.
So if that's the case, listeners, if someone could tweet me at Film at 50's Twitter account, or email me at 50yearsagoinfilm@gmail.com, let us know. Is there a Simpsons episode that like is a spoof of the cold turkey plot? I feel like there has to be.
it seems like such a natural fit to me.
Yeah. I mean, the Simpsons movie, isn't that where like there's like a dome or something around Springfield where they're all kind of like, and Tom Hanks, speaking of Tom Hanks' voice in the movie. so there was that. But yeah, I don't know, like if someone coming into town and offering a bunch of money, that would actually be a really funny episode. I mean, what would they, I mean, they're not all smokers in the Simpsons. Like what would be, well, what's the one thing like Homer Simpson would not do? Like no donuts for a month?
I would imagine it would be drinking. And I was kind of thinking about that while I was watching this movie. I was like, how do you modernize this?
Oh, I knew exactly how to modernize it. Yeah, what was your take on that? How would you modernize it?
Well, first I thought vaping, because I just thought that would be so funny that the vaping lobby comes in and offers you a bunch of money to stop vaping. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, I mean, COVID is probably the best modernization of this. Yeah. You ask people not to go outside or not to meet up with people, and as we've kind of seen, it's hard for people to commit to that.
my feeling was cell phones. Like you have to go without your phone for 30 days. There's no way a town could do that.
No, I don't think I could do that for 30 days.
All of your phones would be collected in this one place in the middle of town, and you had to go 30 days, and you could not. Well, I guess would laptops be included? Like if I had access to my laptop and to social media and to the outside world through my computer or something, that maybe would help the sting a little bit. But
I guess just to make a one-to-one comparison, if somebody came to Sparks and said no technology for 30 days,
no technology at all, like TV too.
Yeah, no electronics, no technology, nothing whatsoever. Do you think you could do it?
I could do it if I personally was getting 25 million. If the guy had like a check and he said, okay, you got to go 30 days without a TV, without a phone, without a laptop. In 30 days, I've got a stack of like 30 books in the other room that I have not gotten to.
Well, the old lady's going to come after whoever is offering it for the town with a gun saying, where's my money?
Yeah, exactly. So if it was 25 million to all of the town, no. But if it was to me, okay. I would go into work. I would teach. What I need the technology to teach though, Dylan. So that'd be tricky. I wouldn't be able to use technology to teach to do my job.
That's why I connected to technology, because it felt like everybody needed a cigarette to live. And
as we see at the beginning of this movie, there is a scene where the beginning of the shot, it's just all gray. And I'm like, is this a shot of the clouds or what? Oh, it's smoke. And the camera pans over and there's just this huge group of people in this big room, and everybody and their grandma is smoking. And it's just like, oh God. That's the scene right where Dick Van Dyke is like kind of motioning to his wife to like put a smile on her face. And she's like, oh, this is not. But yeah, smoking is all over this movie, to the point where I was kind of asking myself in 1969 when this was made, Like, was everybody in the country smoking? Because I mean, I have some grandparents who smoked around this time, but I think by 69, didn't people know that it was bad for you?
I had the same exact question because later on in the movie, you have the doll, which was one of the funniest parts to me. The doll that says, "I love you. Smoking gives you cancer."
Yeah, that was good.
Clearly, they knew the health effects of smoking by this point,
Mhm.
but it was still common enough to make a movie about getting people to stop smoking. So
Yeah.
I want to know, like,
I feel like it was the 70s where they really started cracking down, right? Or maybe even into the 80s. I feel like 69 people were still smoking, and I mean this is the time period of like Woodstock and flower power.
Yeah.
I think people were not against smoking so much as they are today.
Maybe that's the 2021 version where we ask people to give up CBD.
I just want to see the 2021 version where they okay, if all of you stop smoking for 30 days, you'll get 25 million, and everyone goes, okay. No, does anybody smoke? No? Okay. Yeah, we'll do that.
Exactly. Pretty much.
And then you have that one guy who's like, no, I'm a smoker.
That guy was so, I don't know why I thought this movie was so funny, but the guy who, the alcoholic who was like, what did he say? It was like, oh my gosh. It was like, my liquor buds are connected to my smoke pouch. If you disconnect that, I don't know why that was so funny to me.
I like that montage of everyone like in the early days of the month, like trying to kind of get past their desire to smoke. You have that like guru or whatever, like you are smoking. Just close your eyes and picture the cigarettes entering your mouth.
And the massage parlor too. I thought that was kind of racy.
Okay. Yeah. What happens in that scene again?
I think it's a massage therapist, like a really pretty, sexy massage therapist comes to town, and you see people going in and out of that door. One guy is like tripping up the stairs to get to the massage parlor just because I guess they just needed anything to dull the pain of living in Iowa. Sorry to anyone that lives in Iowa. I've never been there. It's probably lovely.
Yeah, that's where my grandparents lived there for a long time. That's where my dad was born. I've never visited, but probably will not. I applied to the Iowa Writers Workshop back in the day. That's like one of the premier MFA and creative writing programs in the country. But yeah, that was a tough one to get into. Because everybody submits there. But then I'm like, but then you have to live in Iowa. And you know why? Because then you get your writing done. Like,
Yeah.
oh, what am I going to do today? I'm going to write.
I bet if either of us spent significant time in Iowa, maybe we would understand this movie a little bit better.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, now we're all kind of in Iowa, right? Because we're all just basically at home.
Mentally, I'm in Iowa.
It's like we get excited on Friday. It's like, oh, it's the weekend. And then it's like, oh, what are we going to go do? Guess I'll work on my podcast.
Guess I'll smoke.
Watch some films.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't smoke, kids. Any other scenes that we like before we get to maybe the ending? Any other scenes before the ending that we liked? I mentioned the Gene Stapleton scene where she's sneezing. I don't really know what the purpose of that was to have her sneeze like 46 times, but it was very funny and I enjoyed
didn't know either.
Because there's very little like slapstick or any kind of like visual gags in this movie. I mean, they're kind of few and far between. There are long scenes in this movie where people are talking and it's not really that funny, and you're like, is this a comedy? What's going on?
Right.
I mean, you have montages like I just mentioned here and there, and some funny visual gags occasionally, but there's stretches of this movie where it's just people talking, and there's not a great like comic like pace to this movie like in other comedies.
I would kind of agree with that. Although you mentioned slapstick, and this was kind of a little bit of fun trivia that I found out, was that when Mr. Tobacco farts, that is actually the first flatulence in like a major motion picture. And I thought that was so interesting.
I did read that, and I was like, well, I feel like I can get away with not talking about that in my trivia notes. But there it is, ladies and gentlemen. The first farts in a film used for what, comedic purposes, or just the first fart ever?
I think just the first part ever. So,
And
you're
that actor, that was his last role before he died.
what a way to go out on.
What a way to go out.
The motion picture industry.
Yeah, that's towards the end, right? When he's in the car and everyone kind of looks at him. Norman Lear, 1969. He's being very progressive with his fart jokes. Very
Exactly.
like decades before we get to Sandler and Farley and all these guys.
They owe everything to Cold Turkey.
Cold Turkey. This movie. I like the casting in this movie. Like there's some oddball, like the old lady who pops up here and there and she plays a kind of a big role at the end. Like she's great. Like I love her look and
so
the way she talks and holding that gun and like it's just really funny. And yeah, I mean it's one of those kind of movies in the middle that's like I felt like it was worth a watch. Like as a fan of Dick Van Dyke and Norman Lear, I kind of like that I've seen this and that we've talked about on the podcast. I don't think I'll watch it ever again.
I don't think so either. But I'm glad
like it was like a, something fun to take a look at, if you like these guys and just something a little different. What do you think of his directing? Like, Norman Lear, we don't really think of as a director. What did he bring to this movie, Dylan, as a director? Anything that you noticed? Like the way it's shot or the way it's paced or anything like that?
I would say probably the biggest strength of this movie for Norman Lear as a director was how people are interacting with each other. And I definitely think that, this gets reflected later on in his TV work where you have these huge kind of ensemble TV casts who are interacting with each other super well and their banter is really funny. And I felt like that was kind of the strength of this movie, where everyone interacting with each other, especially when people get increasingly agitated from not smoking. I thought that was kind of one of the big strengths of the movie. On the other hand, the movie was very flat. Visually, it was very flat to look at, which is maybe fair to Iowa. Maybe it was true to life, but I think it was not a particularly very engaging movie to look at.
We love our Iowa listeners.
I know.
We love you.
I'm going to get canceled by Iowa. I'm sorry, but I'm sure Iowa's lovely.
One other trivia note I forgot to mention was that Dick Van Dyke, when on his days where he was not filming, like he would just tool around Iowa and like drive to random little towns and like he's just an everyman, right? Like nobody knows who he is. And I guess one day, like his car ran out of gas or something, and he had to just he didn't have a phone. Obviously, it's 69, so he just had to like sit on top of his car for a few hours and wait for someone to come by to help him out. And it took a few hours, I think, because it's like middle of nowhere, Iowa. Can you imagine like you're in Iowa in 69 and you're driving down this road to a small town or something, and you see Dick Van Dyke on the side of the road on his car?
I don't even know what I would say. That's just the most excitement I would ever have.
Because I don't know how many films are shot in Iowa. I would say not very many. And I don't know, like, did this movie need to be shot there? I mean, I don't know. Like we get some shots of the exteriors that give a nice feel to it, but there were parts of this I was like, was this shot in a back lot at Universal Studios? Like there are parts of it where I think, as you say, the visual style is not super developed. It's kind of just flat. I feel like there were parts of this I'm like, well, that could have just been shot somewhere in Southern California. But
I think both to its benefit and to its detriment, it's supposed to be kind of, every town USA. It's supposed to be like any given town in middle America. I think that's a benefit because it kind of sets up the story as this kind of small town. And we'll talk about themes, but I think it kind of benefited to have it be this kind of run down, as he says, depressed town. But at the same time, like you said, it could have been anywhere. And I think maybe that's why this movie didn't take off the way it does, because it does have an Iowa setting, but it's not like it's not like an Iowa movie.
Yeah. You don't really get a feel for Iowa like you maybe would with like a better director, like a better film director.
Yeah, I would agree.
But, speaking of Norman Lear, kind of getting towards the end of the movie, one thing I think he does really well is kind of building tension in that last act. Like as we're getting closer and closer to midnight of the final day, and we have, not only everybody getting kind of revved up for that final night, But then you have these montages of like tourists coming in from outside of Iowa, like we want to be here for this, and you have the news media coming in, and you have presidents like political figures in black and white clips, like almost like a Forrest Gump kind of a joke, like they're clearly talking about other things, but
I thought,
but you're like trying to relate it to the movie.
I thought that was so funny how hard they were trying to obscure Richard Nixon in that last.
And then at the end, we get Richard Nixon arriving in this town. Spoiler alert. Where it's just a guy in a mask, but we're supposed to believe it's actually him. That was very strange.
It's so funny how hard they worked at making sure, like, this is Richard Nixon, but we're not going to show him just so many heads and things in the way of his face, where you're like, I think that's Richard Nixon, but I mean, it could be anyone.
Well, it's supposed to be Richard Nixon, but did you see at least in 2 shots? It's a mask on somebody. It's just a Richard Nixon mask.
That's so funny. That's
so I was like, well, that's strange. You think they'd have just an actor who looks a little bit like him, and then they just kind of keep him in the background? That's how most movies do that. But it's like, no, we're going to put a mask on.
Right. This was a pre-CGI world, but I want more movies now to do that, where we need someone to look like someone else. So we're just going to put a mask on him.
Yeah, but at the end, like, they have just a few minutes to go, and they're getting ready, right? They're getting ready to smoke. And 10 minutes ahead of time, like, Bob Newhart's goons, or like, they all get together, like, oh, we're gonna change the time on the clock, on the town giant clock, and it starts ringing, and then they drop the cigarettes from up above, but it's only 11:50. If any one of those people lights up, it's over. And I totally did not buy that. I don't know about you, but I'm like, okay, they're dropping cigarettes. Bob Newhart shouting, okay, it's time to smoke. And I'm like, nobody is lighting up right away. That was like unbelievable.
I had that same thought, because
they would all be lighting up.
Bob Newhart was hyping up his plan so much, and then it gets revealed, and I was like, that was not a great plan. That was a pretty shitty plan, and it did not work out at all.
Yeah. But I thought Norman Lear, the one part of the movie that's paced really well is that like last 15 minutes. I thought he did a good job there. I could feel the tension. I could feel like oh my gosh, no, don't smoke. 10 minutes left. I mean, you've been watching the movie for 90 minutes. So you're like, okay, they've lasted this long. And then you just kind of put yourself in that position. Imagine, let's say you want to go without alcohol for 30 days, or go without a phone or technology, like whatever. And you have 10 minutes left, and then you blow it. That is like, oh gosh, that's awful.
Really, the only person that gave in, or at least tried to give in, was the doctor.
Yeah.
Which I thought was actually kind of funny, how the person who struggled with not smoking the most was the doctor.
Oh yeah. That was we haven't mentioned that scene. That was a funny scene where what is his assistant, is the nurse? He's lighting the match, and he's like working on a guy in the hospital, and the guy's like, oh, I can't really operate unless I have a cigarette, and the guy he's operating on is like, give him a cigarette.
And then when Walter Cronkite walks in.
Which was a take on Walter Cronkite, right?
There was a lot of puns. There were a lot of puns in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just like, that was kind of funny. Like, they're like driving over, trying to get there in time before he lights up, and he's like got it in his mouth, and he's like trying to light. And again, I'm asking myself, why can't he just go down into like a closet somewhere? Who's gonna know?
Because the Americanism police with the arm pans is gonna find you.
Okay. I mean, they bring that up, right? There's a scene where isn't someone in the tobacco company meeting, they ask, well, how do we know that nobody's going to go smoke in private, right?
Yeah,
so they do address it. We don't get very much time with them and Bob Newhart, but we do get a few select scenes throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so there were a few comedic scenes throughout that I enjoyed. I liked the premise, the goofy premise, and I liked the last 15 minutes a lot. And that kind of brought the score up for me a little bit. But yeah, I would say if you're looking for a sharper comedy released the same month of February of 71, I think Little Murders is another kind of obscure comedy directed by Alan Arkin and starring Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland, which is, I think, a funnier, more kind of modern for its time comedy than this one. This felt a little bit more like mid-60s to me.
Right.
That doesn't feel like a 70s movie very much. I don't know.
No, I would agree.
But yeah, so before we move on to our final two segments, we want to talk about theme. Kind of what was this movie trying to say, Dylan? Like, what was Norman Lear kind of going after in this? Like, what's it beyond just what happens on screen? What kind of ideas was he playing with here?
To me, what stuck out the most was the small town community, how a small town interacts with each other, how easily they can be persuaded, how easily they can be tempted. I think that was kind of, at least for me, the most glaring theme. I would say maybe like obsession and obsessive culture is kind of the other really big theme. And I don't know if that was particularly, maybe it is, maybe it was very timely in the early 70s, late 60s, this idea of, becoming so obsessed and so dependent on something.
Yeah, and that small community, I think of like horror stories like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. I think another director could have taken this exact same story and turned this into a really gruesome, upsetting horror film.
Yes.
Well, we get a little bit of that at the end. There's some gunshots and there's some violence at the very end, but I was kind of at the end of this, I was like, like what if like a Wes Craven had taken on this concept or something, it would have been, I think, a better film.
It's so funny how this movie could have very easily been a musical, but also very easily
a horror film.
I think that's such an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. So, and that's what's so great about, something so interesting about storytelling, right? Is like, if you just change a couple little things, it can go in a totally different direction and even a new genre. So yeah, I think, the community idea, and, it's kind of one of the oldest themes in the books, right? But like, money can equal corruption. And this is a case where they're doing all of this just to get that 25 million. And what do we get in the end? I mean, people are celebrating because they last the 30 days, but the town, I don't know, we won't give away the last shot of what happens to the town. Let's not give that away. But like, I was like, I don't think the town is better off. What do you think?
Well, yeah, they said, we're going to build a new school. We're going to build a new hospital.
Yeah, they're going to do good things for the town.
What we ended up getting, I thought, was actually kind of tragic a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, hooray. It was like, oh.
Okay, well, great.
So yeah, I feel like, all of the efforts of Dick Van Dyke's character throughout this whole movie, it's like, what does he get in the end? This is what happens when you go after money for the wrong reasons and doing something, outside the box that, maybe shouldn't have started in the first place.
Yeah. But, in the end, everybody loses.
Everybody loses, really, at the end. Nobody's really gained much of anything in that last scene. But yeah, so I would give this like 2.5 stars. I would say if you're a fan of these two figures, it's worth your time. If you're a fan of classic films and films of the 1970s, I would say to look for it. If you're not a big Dick Van Dyke person, Norman Lear means nothing to you, you can probably skip it.
I would probably agree with that. Although I will say I am glad that I watched this movie.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. Yeah. I don't think I've had like one where I've had a guest on where he's like, this was rough.
What was it? I want to know.
It was David Lean's 3.5 hour long Ryan's Daughter, which the director of Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, he made this like quiet, intimate love story in 1970 that should have been 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. And David Lean made it kind of like the same he did Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai, making it 3.5 hours and, just amazing cinematography. It looks gorgeous, but the story itself does not lend itself to 3.5 hours.
You've got to justify that runtime.
Like 2.5 hours would have been deadly, but it's 3.5 hours. So you're just like, I was like, oh my gosh. And my guest didn't know that it was that long until the night before we were to record. He like texted me, was like, I just looked at the running time and I thought he was out. I was like, uh-oh, this is just gonna be me tomorrow. But he showed up and he had great things to say about the movie, but he might have said more than once, like, it's really long.
Right.
So I really think about running time now more than maybe ever before. When I see if there's a movie I'm interested in and it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, I'm like,
I'm the same way. I am part of the club that thinks that a 75-minute movie is like So good.
It
That's
doesn't need to be
heavy.
that short. I'm big on 90 minutes. If you're a comedy and you go longer than 90 minutes, there should be a very good reason. And a drama, you have 2 hours. Over 2, you have to earn it.
I totally agree.
You know,
Totally.
and there are, of course, great dramas that go over 2 that I love every minute of. I mean, you have films like The Godfather and The Dark Knight, and so Goodfellas. I mean, so many great films that I would love to be another hour, right? So there are exceptions, but usually, you know, especially today, I feel like if you're going over 2 hours, you better bring it. You better have something really unique to say and do. You know,
I couldn't agree more. And like I like some pretty long movies. One of my guilty pleasures is Hello Dolly, and that is a long, long, long movie.
I love Titanic. That's 3 hours
Yeah.
and 15 minutes. I don't know how that movie could be any shorter. Like, I don't know how you make that 2 hours. Like, it wouldn't work. That movie needs to be that length to work as a
Right.
film. So
Like you
sometimes
said-
you need that extra hour.
Right.
But not all the time. Green Mile, which I enjoy, by Frank Darabont with Tom Hanks. That movie's 3 hours. That could have been 2.
Right.
That's
Unless
a
you're
whole long
Lord of the
discussion.
Rings, unless you're Lord of the Rings or Titanic,
Oh boy, yeah.
it'd be 3 hours.
Don't get me started on The Hobbit. 300-page book, 3-hour long movie. Okay. All right, so Dylan, that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature. That's where we pick a more modern film that we think would make a kind of an interesting double feature with Cold Turkey, something released in like the last 20 to 25 years. Anything come to mind? Like, what would be, as soon as Cold Turkey ended, what would be kind of like a cool movie for people to watch right after?
Well, after this movie ended, I started thinking about, small town satires.
Okay.
Like, what is a good small town satire to pair with this movie? And my thought was Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Okay.
Because
love that movie.
It's so funny.
Is that in Iowa? Where is that set? It's set in a very small town, right?
That is set in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin,
Which might as well be Iowa. But I think both Cold Turkey and Drop Dead Gorgeous are about how a small town kind of copes with the banality of living in a small town. Cold Turkey does so with smoking. Drop Dead Gorgeous does so with pageants. Both are equally as harmful to your health.
Yeah, that movie just grows and grows in stature, man. I remember seeing that on video when it came out. Like, the film was released in theaters in summer of '99, and then I didn't see it until probably early 2000 on video, and I liked it. And it's just one of those that, like, it almost gets funnier the more you watch it. Like, it's really great.
Right, and it's a lot edgier, and I would also say a lot funnier than Cold Turkey is. But
Yeah.
I think if you watch them back to back, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting satire on small towns.
Yeah. So we're on the same wavelength here. I was also thinking of like a comedy, a little not super new. It's in the mid '90s. That's also about small town. That's very funny, and that's Waiting for Guffman by Christopher Guest. Have you seen that movie?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good one.
So that's actually, if you want to talk about a great pairing of 2 movies, would be Waiting for Guffman and Drop Dead Gorgeous. That's a great pairing. Maybe just forget Cold Turkey and watch those 2.
It's always so funny to me to remember that Drop Dead Gorgeous is not a David Guest movie.
Yeah, Christopher Guest. It feels like Guest. Drop Dead Gorgeous. I feel like it's a little bit like different than his usual. I almost feel like Christopher Guest is a little bit gentler. That's the word I would use, like a gentler filmmaker. Even Best in Show, which has a lot of like harsh scenes with Parker Posey and her husband. Like,
so fun.
Mighty Wind is very kind of a quiet comedy. Waiting for Guffman has that just jaw-dropping twist at the end that just rips your heart out. But it's such a sweet kind of comedy. I really like that about it.
That's so interesting that was your choice, and I feel like we were both kind of on the same wavelength there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other one I thought of, I've only seen it once, so I didn't want to make it my number one choice, but I thought another satire that I remember liking at the time was Thank You for Smoking, starring Aaron Eckhart, which came out in 2006. Also kind of a satire comedy about smoking with a big ensemble cast. But that one's kind of the opposite, right? He's trying to get people to smoke. Right? So it's like the opposite of Cold Turkey. So if you wanted a double feature about like comedy satire films about smoking, Like if you wanted to go that direction, Thank You for Smoking from '06 would probably be a good one to show after this. And then maybe on a different day, just watch Waiting for Guffman and Drop Dead Gorgeous back to back.
Yeah,
That's a good night. That's a good viewing.
that's a good tag.
All right, so our final segment, I wanted to talk about, especially when I looked at the filmography of Dick Van Dyke, after this movie, he's basically done with film outside of a couple random roles here and there. So this would be a good one to talk about for the podcast, like about the career of Dick Van Dyke. So what does that actor mean to you, Dylan? And do you have 2 or 3 favorites you can share with us starring Dick Van Dyke, his films?
Well, like most people, I would say when I think about Dick Van Dyke, I think of Mary Poppins.
No.
I think of I know such a deep
what's that about again?
Never seen it.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one.
Mary Poppins, every time I watch it, it always takes me back to, like, I always forget how long that movie is.
Every time I'm like, oh my God, this movie's long. I love it, but it's very long.
You are with those penguins for what feels like 3 days.
Yeah, Mary Poppins is probably one of my favorite movies that I feel like 30 minutes could be cut out of it.
I agree. But, I think Mary Poppins is so typical of the role of Dick Van Dyke, especially some of the other movies that I was thinking about with Dick Van Dyke. Bye Bye Birdie, like you had mentioned, that was kind of his first
big role in a movie.
Yeah. Bye Bye Birdie, so interesting and also very of its time. And I think that both Mary Poppins and Bye Bye Birdie have Dick Van Dyke as this very amiable, very kind of everyman, song and dance man, physical comedy, which I think is very, when you watch those movies, then you watch Cold Turkey, it's a little jarring, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my third favorite would be Bye Bye Birdie. I've only seen it once. I watched it on Turner Classic Movies a few years ago. I remember being so interested in watching it because it starred a post-Psycho Janet Leigh.
Yeah.
and she's in that movie. And to see Dick Van Dyke. I mean, basically, if I see on Turner Classic Movies like a Dick Van Dyke movie is going to air, like I'll record it. So I've seen a couple of his other films from the 60s. Not all of them.
Speaking of which, one of my favorite movies starring Dick Van Dyke is from 1964, the same year that Mary Poppins came out.
Yeah, tell me about this one. I do not know this one.
So it's called What a Way to Go, and it is, I think, severely underappreciated, underrated. It stars Shirley MacLaine as kind of a serial widower who marries all these men, and they end up, spoiler alert, they end up dying. Dick Van Dyke plays her first husband, who's kind of again, he's an everyman. He owns the small store. He has no ambition, and that's kind of what she likes about him. But when he decides to make it big and become successful, he ultimately dies from that. And that movie is so interesting because the cast is pretty insane. Her husbands include Dick Van Dyke, Paul Newman, Robert Mitchum, Gene Kelly, and then at the end, she ends up with Dean Martin.
How have I not heard of this movie?
All these huge...
Paul Newman?
Yes.
In
Paul
64?
Newman French. That's all I'm going to say. Paul Newman speaking French. That just...
Oh, I'm totally watching this. This sounds really interesting. And it's the same year of Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Julie Andrews has kind of a little bit more obscure film also from 64, The Americanization of Emily, a drama, black and white drama with James Garner, also came out in 1964. So Mary Poppins is the movie we all know, but both of those leads of Mary Poppins have these other films that are almost worth our times more, especially now that we've seen Mary Poppins 80 gazillion times. Like, go check out some of their lesser known work,
And I think that's kind of what's great and what's really, I would say, rewarding about getting into kind of classic films is watching a movie that you've seen a billion times and then branching off from there into other movies. You've seen Mary Poppins a billion times and you love Julie Andrews. What else is she in?
Yeah.
And that kind of leads you down a couple different roads. So I would say if you haven't watched What a Way to Go, it is so, it is crazy. It is funny. It is a visual delight. So I highly recommend it.
So yeah, I'm going to check that one out. That's the 60s Dick Van Dyke movie I need to see for sure. After you read that cast name, the list of names, I was like, oh my God.
Just
So
every
the other one I think is worth mentioning that I really enjoyed. I again only have seen it once, but it's really fun, and that's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. Although I just watched Bedknobs and Broomsticks the other day,
Oh
which
yes, we'll
is
get to that later
kind
this year.
which is kind of an off-brand Mary Poppins. I'll just come right out
Yeah.
and say
It's
it.
even
Kind of,
as a child, even as a kid, I was like, this is kind of like Mary Poppins, but with different people. And then one guy who's in both. You know,
that's right. The dad plays.
David Tomlinson is kind of the connecting figure of the two movies.
That's
And he
right. Yeah.
looks like the same in both. Like he wears like the same clothes, he acts the same way.
But again, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that's a musical.
Mhm.
So I feel like, I would be down for Cold Turkey the musical.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean we have to go with Mary Poppins as her favorite. It's just such an iconic film. It's a movie that I feel like any generation will love. I mean, going decades from now, I feel like that movie has the kind of staying power that few films do. And um, I just it makes me so happy that we still have Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke with us.
Again, we
they're
just
such
need to
legendary
protect them.
figures.
I
Uh,
know. I'm going to be so sad if we jinx it.
yeah, let's hope by the time this episode airs, please still be with us. But yeah, there's a great Blu-ray of Mary Poppins that has newer bonus features, one of which Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke reunite and like talk about the making of the movie. I think it was done in the last like 8 to 10 years, and they still look great. And they're, he was like still dancing and stuff. It's fantastic.
So lovely. And
yeah.
it's actually kind of funny to think about how we wouldn't have Mary Poppins as we know it if they would have cast Julie Andrews in My Fair Lady.
And My Fair Lady, which also came out in 64. Yeah, Julie Andrews played that role on stage, Eliza Doolittle. And they didn't think she had the charisma, the power to actually transfer that over to a film version. So they hire major Oscar-winning, movie star,
Yeah.
to take over for her. And we think, Audrey Hepburn will probably beat out, Julie Andrews for the Oscar. And then Audrey Hepburn's not even nominated that year. Julie Andrews is nominated for. It's amazing to me that Audrey Hepburn, she's in this movie that was also project that was meant for Julie Andrews. In the same year, Julie Andrews wins the Oscar for Mary Poppins. And she's not even nominated. It's like crazy.
In that acceptance speech, she says, I want to thank the man that made this all possible,
Jack Warner.
Who, you know what? It's just one of the funniest, most ironic moments in film history. And fun fact, there's a lot of ties in this episode, but one of the original choices to play Mary Poppins was Bette Davis.
What? I have never heard that in all my research on that movie. I've never heard that. Where'd you hear that?
I forget where I heard it. I think
Bette Davis would have been too old, I think, in 64 for Mary. Well, I guess, I mean, that was a choice. I mean, I think maybe Julie Andrews was younger than the character in the books by P.L. Travers. Maybe it made more sense to have someone.
I think they wanted an older. Yeah, I think they wanted an older, more kind of stern character for Mary Poppins to kind of coincide with the book. But I mean, Bette Davis singing Spoonful of Sugar. I want it, and I want it bad.
I wish we could go back in time. Someone make that version. But yeah, I mean, Dick Van Dyke is not in a whole lot of movies, and if I had to pick a favorite, it has to be Mary Poppins. It's just such an iconic, important film, especially in Disney history. It's one of my favorites. It's a lot of fun.
It's his best role, but that accent is horrendous.
It's fine. It doesn't bother me that much.
The way that he says silhouette in that movie, like I think about it all the time. He says it like silhouette. And it is it's just bad, but still such a great performance.
Yeah. One of his best for sure. All right. Well, thank you for being on the show today, Dylan. To end here, if you have anything to promote or anywhere online that our listeners can reach out to you or find you, now would be the time to share that with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun talking to you today. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram at dyl.anders. and let's talk about movies. I would love to be able to talk to you more about some movies if you have anything else on the slate.
Absolutely. We have a long list of 1971 movies coming up. This is the first month of the podcast talking about films from 71. So there's a lot of interesting, obscure, famous, critically acclaimed, not critically acclaimed movies coming to the podcast in the months to come. So we'll definitely have you back.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And thank you all of you for listening to Film at 50. You can catch us online at filmat50.com. We're available on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can email us at 50yearsagoinfilm@gmail.com. Also, check out our Patreon page, which has at least 2 exclusive bonus episodes every month. You can find that at patreon.com/filmat50. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.